Hello, everyone, and welcome to Breckcast, Breckland Council's podcast, our new way of reaching our residents, our business community, and our valued partners. Throughout our podcast series, we will be exploring the work of the Council, lifting the lid on how we deliver the services you rely upon, discussing that delivery with our partner organisations across the district and further afield, and exploring the issues that matter to you. I'm Stephen McCarthy from the Breckland Communications team. Today, we are talking about Breckland's Rural Business Support, a pioneering service here in the east of England that is being led by Phil Garnham, our Rural Business Advisor. With the support of our Deputy Leader and Executive Member for Housing and Planning, Councillor Sarah Suggett, and our Executive Member for Economic Development and Growth, Councillor Paul Clausen. Today we're talking about rural business support and how Breckland Council has stepped up in terms of trying to support our rural business community. Why do rural businesses matter so much to the local economy and community life in Breckland? Phil, I'll start with you.
I think there's an old adage which says that for every pound spent by a farm is worth 8 to the local community. And that can be anywhere from in terms of people that the farm employs or products that the farm purchases, but then goes on to sell throughout. And it's been farming's become an integral part for centuries of rural life, and especially in a district like Breckland. It is a rural district. We are predominantly surrounded by farmland, and it's always a topic of conversation, and especially so recently. I've been doing this job for a year this week, and in my time doing so, I've seen 3 very visual differences in terms of people's mindsets, how they're looking at doing or conducting business, and what their plans are for the future. And it's been a very fast-moving environment. I don't think farming has had to come up with so many adjustments in such a short space of time before.
Phil mentioned, Paul, that he's been with us now for a year as the Economic Development and Growth Portfolio Holder. What was the impetus, or what was the vision behind the creation of Phil's role whenever we decided as an organisation to go in that direction?
Well, it was an area that just wasn't being covered. And also we were being told that it was quite difficult to get the farmers to engage with us. And when you look at how important farming is in general, because it isn't just the farmers, they get all the press, obviously, but behind that there is a whole big business, machinery, you name it, it's there. And so it really made absolute sense for us that we had to have somebody that was take the council to that audience, and so that we would get feedback on what we needed to do better. And I think we are now doing better.
Sarah, as well as being our Deputy Leader and our Executive Member for Housing and Planning, and obviously Housing and Planning has a significant link with rural business and our farming community as well. You are also deeply embedded in the rural business community. What are some of the key challenges facing rural businesses currently that we as an organisation are trying to address through this role?
I think, like Phil said, this area of the country is it's like the breadbasket of the country. We're full of traditional farms which have been about with us for a really long time. And I think Phil's point that they've seen a huge amount of change in a real short space of time is quite key. Farms are having to deal with much more red tape now, for want of a better word, than perhaps what they ever have done. As an industry, it's a really isolated, lonely space to work. Not many people accept how and appreciate how it works, the challenges what farmers have. I think we take for granted. We look out the window, we see a field, we might get a bit annoyed if we get stuck behind a tractor on the road. It might be a little bit frustrating if we can smell a whiff of pig in the air. However, they are all part of what puts food on our table, what allows our supermarket shelves to be full, and people don't necessarily really understand that. So I think farmers get a bit of a bad rap for doing their job, but I think to be a farmer, it's for them, it's more than just a job. It's a part of their way of life. It's for them, they would class it as being a hobby than a job. But that said, they're quite stubborn creatures themselves. They won't necessarily always go out and ask for help, appreciate what's out there, go and look for any of that stuff themselves. And I think it started to become quite apparent to us with work that we're doing through consultation around local plan and some of the call for sites and the land which we were having come forward. Farmers are having to start to think very differently about what it is, what they do with their land, perhaps their business plans. Farmers probably haven't had to think about business plans, tax planning in quite the same way in which they're currently having to do all of that. And I think, like Paul covered off, it was the right thing for us to do at the right moment in time to start putting some of that additional support in that rural community, what we have been doing really well within our high streets, our manufacturers, our businesses that we know well, but we were doing our farmers and our more rural business a bit of a disservice by not completely understanding that ourselves as a council and how we can then go out and best signpost and help those farmers. The help is out there for them. It's just knowing whereabouts it is they can go and tap into that.
And you've touched on some of the issues that they face, and you've referred to it as red tape. Phil, you are speaking to farmers and rural business owners on a daily basis. Can you go into more detail of exactly what those challenges are and the wide range of challenges they face?
Certainly, I think a very good recent example would be with regards to, we've just had a prolonged drought from February through to the middle of July, and we've got farm businesses who rely on irrigation in order to produce their crops. In particular, onions are very thirsty, and we've got a collection of farmers all around the Brecks who need to irrigate, and we're told you're not going to be able to irrigate now. 250 farmers been told you're not going to be allowed to irrigate. There's not enough water in the rivers. We can't let them get below a certain depth. You then have to sort of start having conversations with people within government agencies like the Environment Agency, and just push back and say, do you realise what the knock-on impact of this is going to be? This isn't just somebody watering their grass. This is somebody's livelihood. This is their business. They came back after pressure from the likes of ourselves and the NFU and a few other councils around the area, and reversed that decision. But then on the flip side of that, you've got farmers who are recognising that we're also having extraordinarily wet autumns and winters. So you have all this water, which is then going straight back into the rivers and not being saved for these sorts of events. They're putting in for planning permission to build freshwater reservoirs. That can take 18 months for that to go through, and that's not any issue with regards to your district council. That is the process and the red tape that they have to go through with regards to the government agencies. And then even once they've done that, they then might not be given the extraction license they need to utilise the water that they've effectively harvested anyway. So it's that sort of issue is it's a real stumbling block for a lot of farmers who are taking on board the time and expense to try and do the right thing, both for themselves but also from an environmental point of view. You do sort of have to question the thinking of and the communication within some of the government sectors, but that's where we come in to try and educate and show them the bigger issue at hand.
And what you've said there, I think, points to something that all three of you have mentioned about the rural community and rural business farmers, is the kind of self-sufficiency and resourcefulness of them, that they are very quick to try and solve the problems that they're faced with. And that actually probably adds to the frustration, because they're willing to adopt solutions to their problems when they're faced with problems that are arising as a result of the climate and things like that. They're willing to take steps to try and mitigate. But that's whenever they then face the red tape, the challenges, the long drawn out processes, and the lack of potentially joined up thinking to meet those challenges. In terms of national trends in agriculture and the challenges that rural businesses face nationwide, how are they impacting on businesses here in Breckland?
Going back to when I started, that I've seen 3 periods in this last year. When I joined at the tail end of July, I was going out on farm, and the conversations I were having were about expansion, diversification. People were as buoyant as farmers ever get, I suppose, I'd say. But there was an air of positivity. People were looking at doing something different. They knew they needed to add more value to their business. They needed to do something additional. Fast forward through to the autumn and the autumn budget and the changes that brought with it. So with the removal of agricultural property relief and business property relief, it stopped all economic ideas in their tracks. The engagement I had didn't stop, but the conversations that I had been having weren't going to go anywhere. The argument was, well, if I put up a additional store now for this wheat that I'm going to grow, or if I buy this additional 20-30 acres, all I'm doing now is providing an issue for my estate on my passing. We can't afford that. We can barely afford what we have at the moment. So it was, those sorts of conversations became a common theme. And then we come into the new year, and you talk about farmers being very quick to sort of diversify, but very quick to come up with new ideas. And these are people who've always had to be very fleet-footed in terms of, you have an idea of what you're going to grow in the autumn. You have a wet autumn, so you have to come up with a solution in the spring, and then, hey presto, you've hopefully managed to salvage something. And a lot of people were looking at the sustainable farm incentive, so they would be able to either put land into a various scheme, which might be set towards winter bird food, or it might be a long-term grass lay. So they were taking land out of production, but they would have been receiving a government subsidy in return. That got abruptly withdrawn. So all of a sudden, you've gone from a plan A to a plan B to nothing. So the conversations that I had been having in the previous summer then started to come to the fore. Okay, well, what will I need to do in order to create that extra income that I need? And then we'd start talking about various plans. Do we look at glamping? Do you want to convert these buildings? And so on and so forth. And the more we had these conversations, the bigger issues that kept rising were things like the planning application fees. One farm I went to see not so long ago has an existing but somewhat dilapidated pig unit on site. They want to knock it all down, put up a new system. It'll be more environmentally friendly. It'll be much more economically viable. They'll be able to have more pigs on it. But the application costs before they even started were prohibitively expensive, so they haven't done it. And that's the sort of issue. Again, we don't set those figures. Those figures come from central government, and we are relaying that information back and forth to try and stop this as an obstacle. And then you can't do any more than that at the moment. But there seems to be a constant hurdle.
Just to add to that, I think the business model, if you like, that farmers have historically used doesn't work in this current climate. There are so many factors which now affect it. Farmers, if you was to probably ask them, would say that they are custodians of the land at a moment in time, and they have historically done that. And they have grown crops on the land. They've reared animals on the land, and it's been from a source of knowledge which their forefathers have come down to them with. We're now asking farmers, or they are being asked to do things in a way where actually it's financially driven, it's permit driven, you've got legislation, you've got all of this other stuff, which is actually up there as quite high factors in their decision making. If we were allow farmers to do what we know that they know how to do best, and there wasn't those other external factors, we would probably have a much better use of our land, crops which come out of it, because of all the things that Phil has said. They have learnt, they are resourceful. They're not going to do any harm intentionally. It is what it is, what they go out to do. They've learned how to do those things. And I think some of those challenges around permits, those different organizations you've got to deal with, that is not how a farmer's brain work. And unless you then incur other costs, which not all farms can do that, where you have consultants or other industries like that come out and can help you navigate all of that. I think some of Phil's role, he's seeing where you've probably got farmers that are missing out in some of those grants. They don't perhaps necessarily, something's about to stop in front of them, albeit some of them's been quite drastically, we're going to stop that today, because they don't have that support network around them, because they're things what they haven't had to deal with before. We hear from builders and developers all the time around skill shortage, around how much materials are costing. The agricultural sector is not immune to that. It's not really the sexy industry, what people really want to say, I'm going to leave school and go into that. The wages aren't great. Kids want to do different things. It's something which perhaps we're diluting that industry a bit with new people coming forward. But to put up a new agricultural building, Phil's alluded to the cost of an application, but there are surveys and things which go on to that. But the cost of putting a building up now, that's probably even prohibitive before you even get going. And then you don't always have your incomes known before you do that. So we are asking farmers to take quite a leap of faith if they are to continue to do their role as they have done for us for generations before.
Both Paul and Phil, you've both touched on working closely with partners and that gathering through your role, Phil, of intelligence, effectively, of gathering that pulse of the farming community in Breckland. What is Breckland Council doing to try and tackle some of these challenges that you're identifying by working with partners, with statutory partners, Environment Agency, with other organisations, particularly in trying to lobby, for example, central government for change?
I think my sort of best success, I suppose I'd term it to date, would involve working with Natural England. In Breckland, we have the second highest population of pigs and poultry in the country. So we have an awful lot of people who are constantly looking to expand and bring more pigs and chickens into the food chain. And with that come all sorts of exciting issues, one of which is ammonia. Now, I was invited to become part of a group which involved Breckland and our environmental health team, but also the Environment Agency, Natural England, and a couple of other government agencies to discuss this as an issue. And we were seeing as a council that there were an awful lot of objections coming forward from the likes of the EA and Natural England with regards to ammonia levels. And so, not to bore everybody, but Natural England and the Environment Agency had decided between a level for ammonia should be 1, which in the grand scheme of things doesn't mean anything to the average listener, but it's very, very, very difficult to accomplish. You are talking about being able to almost stop any escape of ammonia from the building, but also you're trying to putting so many mitigating factors that it becomes an absolute headache. So what we were seeing were an awful lot of sites which had been standing for 5-10 years. You're not talking ancient, but we've made great strides in capturing that sort of thing in the last decade. So people were putting forward plans which weren't quite getting down to this level, but bearing in mind their ammonia levels at that point were 7, so quite a big gap between what the EA and Natural England were aiming for. We gave a presentation and we described what people were having to do, even with best practice, what was realistically achievable, using scrubbers to try and capture this ammonia and then recirculate it to create energy. So a really top spec what a green system would look like. And there was lots of nodding of heads and lots of conversation of, could you do this? Well, you could, but the knock-on effect would mean that. And we all went away, sort of having said our piece. And nothing was really said. I followed it up a week later. Has anybody got any further questions? Is there anything that we need to expand on? Would be keen to try and make this happen. Nothing, nothing came up. Nobody sort of put their hands up and said, "Oh, actually, we could do with another chat with you over this, that, or t'other." And then over the course of the next couple of months, I was getting phone calls from various land agents saying, "Have you heard anything?" Like, no, I haven't. Why? Well, we've just had this application go through. No objections, no comment at all. So we'd never had that normally. And it just carried on like this. And this has been something which has now slowly just trickled through. And as a result, we've started to see a few more applications come in from people who would have been quite reticent. And it's quite clearly, whilst there's been no declaration, but it quite clearly shows that the message was received and understood. And a little bit of pragmatism on improvement can go an awful long way. But also I'm working very closely with the NFU and the CLA, as they are two membership organisations, and not everybody is a member of one or the other or both. So I try and straddle that line. With regards to various things, for example, DEFRA released a £150 million budget, war chest, whatever you like to call it, for various farming schemes. One of which was to encourage a higher proportion of children or school visits onto farms. So I've been in touch with the NFU and CLA to say, we've got lots of farms in this area who would be happy to do that, and speaking with them and trying to get that off the ground. And it's combining our communication, but also utilising their network as well to say, we are forward-facing as council. We want to engage. We want to help. We're not just here to make. It seems as though we make life difficult. We are genuinely trying to have a positive impact. So it's that sort of thing has been the pinnacle of my time so far.
And it does sound in small parts, it does sound as though there is a listening ear. The fact that you have seen that change, whether it's that there hasn't been a declaration to say, yes, we've heard you and we're going to make a change as a result of that the applications have started to be approved. But also, Sarah, you pointed out earlier around the fact that it's seen as a difficult industry by those that are already in it, and therefore there are perhaps children that are growing up in farming families that maybe aren't going to go into farming as a result of seeing that difficulty. And there are those who are outside the industry that are probably never going to consider it as a career. So the idea that there is funding there and there's a willingness with farmers to open up their farms to school children to consider it as a viable and very rewarding career at the same time is good to hear.
It is, because there has been, as Paul said, there has been such a big disconnect between cities and just rural areas that people, I think it was a program about 2-3 weeks ago, they were asking children, where does your food come from? Sainsbury's. That's and what do you expect them to think? Because that's what they have. They have that sort of poured into them from every possible point of consumption that they have. Whether they're watching videos online or what, they're bombarded with information about supermarkets.
I've got kind of two final questions. What's next? How do we plan to continue on to work with our rural business community? How do we see this growing? And how do we see our support as a council continuing going forward? Sarah?
So I think building on Phil's success, it's been quite a breakthrough getting through some of those external partners. It's quite time consuming for some of our planning officers, environmental health officers, to build some of those relationships with Environment Agency, Natural England, for example. we're really good at it in other areas of the council, and I think this is where we've now started to really see a breakthrough in this. It's had additional benefits wider than just from the farming community, granted, but given that that's where we're focusing on with this, to continue to build on that can only be a good thing. It's been really quite an eye opener, like I mentioned previously, in the local plan process. How some of those landowners have come forward, and they're starting to have much more open, honest conversations with our planners. Possibly our planners, not just our planners, but planners in general, maybe somebody that people would think, oh, I don't want to talk to them, or they'll keep their cards a bit close to their chest. But I think it's about building those relationships again. Our rural community appreciating that. I think, like Phil said, we've got an open door to anybody coming in. If you've got an idea or conversation that you would like to just have, a bit of advice on, a nudge in the right direction, we're starting to see a little bit more confidence and comfort in some of those people who wouldn't necessarily have engaged with our planners to start to do that. So I think, we've still got some work to do around giving some of those people that comfort that, we can do, like what Phil's saying, offer that support, see them through. We're not going to be able to say yes to everything all the time. We're not that golden bullet that's going to fix all of these problems. But we absolutely are committed to doing the best what we can, whether that be, like Phil said, I think leveraging in extra funding, looking at lobbying where we can to perhaps get funding in places where it's currently not at. All of this stuff which we're now starting to see through the good work what Phil's doing whilst he's out and about, we can build on that and well, just take better strides from there.
Paul, this is a question that I know that you'll enjoy answering.
Yeah.
If you had 30 seconds to speak directly to decision makers in government and central government agencies, what would you say to them on behalf of Breckland's rural businesses?
Please, please, please use your ears and mouth in the way God gave them to you. You need to listen. You need to listen, and you don't need to come out with silly remarks which have nothing to do with rural living at all. When I was on the planning committee, all of the planning issues coming out of central government, did they fit rural Breckland? No, they didn't. And so then you take it further on to farming communities and the rural business community. Please, please, just come out here, listen, understand, because unless you want to have all of your food coming from abroad, you're definitely going down the right route to have it that way, in my opinion. And how many tons of carbon is that going to add to the bill?
Phil, last question. You are at the coalface. You are out there working with our rural business community. What is the one piece of advice or encouragement that you would give someone running a rural business in Breckland right now?
Pick up the phone and give us a ring. If you have an idea and you're not sure where to begin, get in touch with me and I can sort of help walk you through the process. There is an entire council at your disposal to help you realise your business aspirations, but also we are here to listen to what your issues might be to sort it out. We are a forward-thinking, open to business council.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Phil. And thank you, Paul. It's been lovely speaking to you. Well, everyone, you have been listening to Phil Garnham, our Rural Business Advisor, our Deputy Leader and Executive Member for Housing and Planning, Councillor Sarah Suggett, and our Executive Member for Economic Development and Growth, Councillor Paul Clausen, talking about Breckland's trailblazing work in supporting our rural business community. I have been your host, Stephen McCarthy, from Breckland's Communications team. Thank you so much for listening.